The thing that I'm most energized about in terms of my work, as well as what's going on in the culture, is this current state of men. I'm really concerned about men, and I think it's fixable, and I think we can fix it in our generation. So I'm writing, speaking, building movements, everything I can do to answer it. But everything I see in the news, what I see happening culturally, everything from the Me Too moment to hassles in sports to criminal activity to declining educational standards, all of it comes back, as far as I'm concerned, to the crisis of manhood in our generation. So that's what's got me most exercised right now.
Interesting. So that's actually a surprising answer because, so this is a great segue because I did want to talk about manhood.
Great.
And I knew that was an interest of yours. However, I'm surprised by the fact that it's of most interest to you right now with everything that's going on.
Yeah.
Because it has been of interest to you for a number of years, correct?
It has.
So,
I think probably the way to understand it is I do a wide variety of things. I work with the Kurds. I work in D.C. I consult politically. I do a lot of speaking. I mean, all the things that you know that I do. But for some reason, all of it has circled back around to manhood. Now, that's not the only thing I'm going to do, obviously. But whatever conversation you and I have today, whether it's leadership, the Trump administration, crises in churches, situations in universities, criminal stuff, ISIS, wherever we go in the world, whatever we're talking about, there's a hook in that about manhood. So even though I continue to focus on the things I've always focused on, somehow I'm always being forced back to the issue of manhood as part of the solution to any crisis I'm talking about. And that's why I just can't let it go. So I've committed about a third to a quarter to half of my time for the rest of my life to helping men become great men.
fascinating. So is that just a result of a statistical measure, say men are 50% of the population, although I have no idea what the actual percentage is, or is that result of the particular role of men or in manhood, or there's something particularly gone wrong with manhood? When you say all these things come back to manhood, is that just because half the world is male, and so naturally a lot of things are going to come back, or is there something different going on?
It's not anything different, but with the cultural crisis that we've been in, maybe since, let's say, the 60s when it comes to manhood, which really is sort of the beginning of the real disease that's attaching itself to modern masculinity. All of that it's sort of bearing fruit now in our culture. So whatever we're talking about, ISIS, for example, is a manhood issue. There's just no question about it. I know people think of it in terms of Islam, but I know some guys in ISIS, and I know some people who've been captured by ISIS, and those guys are just untethered street thugs who got captured by a violent movement. So what's my conclusion? Noble manhood, good fathering, an ethical code, a vision of manhood for that culture would have changed that, would be part of the answer for that. And by the way, will have to be if we're going to really defeat ISIS in the hearts of people. Again, I'm not being political at this moment. We talk about the crises in D.C., whether it's the cowardice of Congress or it's the actions of Trump or whatever it is. We're still talking about manhood issues and how men conduct themselves and how they speak of women and how they, if we're talking about Hollywood and the arts, well, the Me Too movement is pretty much, swept through that. So my point is that no matter what I look at, no matter what I talk about, no matter what I'm focused on, I keep having the fruits of this confusion about masculinity and what it is and how it ought to function be thrown back in my face. And so I just can't get away from it.
Yeah. Well, you wrote a book on it, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, an utterly invigorating guide to being your most masculine self. I think this was copyrighted in, 2013, 2014?
Yeah, around then.
Okay. Which I read this book in 2014, I believe it was. Really, really enjoyed it.
I'm glad.
I reference it occasionally. So thank you for writing this. I believe it's in this book, there's a quote, and I can't recall now if it's from you or if it's from someone else, but I'm pretty sure it's in this book. It's masculinity is earned by winning small battles with honor.
Yeah.
So what might that look like for the average American male in 2019?
Well, I think we'd have to look at each guy's context. What is honor? Honor is doing the noble thing. Honor is being the best you can be for a higher cause than just yourself. Honor is using your gifts as a male for the defense and the protection and the betterment of other people. So how can you as a male conduct yourself for the betterment of women? How can you prepare yourself? How do you take care of your body? How do you take care of your mind? How do you prepare yourself, even martially? I don't mean to be dramatic about it, but even in terms of self-defense and what have you. How do you become a good man? If you are married, You live, for the glory of God, but you also got to produce. You've got to. I have a friend who jokingly says, "Ain't no romance without finance." I mean, in other words, a husband, a father, he's got to be earning the money. He's got to know how to manage that money. So there's an investment in skills. There's an investment in effectiveness that is a result of that honor. And honor, of course, is living for a higher value system. It's living for something beyond yourself. And that's a lot of what's happened in modern manhood, is that modern manhood has been made to seem as though it's a bunch of testosterone men guided by their penises going through life marauding and raping and pillaging. That's the toxic masculinity they talk about on the campuses. Well, I believe manhood's nobler than that. And it's not all about service. It's not all about other people. It's also about tending yourself and walking through life with a band of brothers. But the average man in our generation does not have any of those skills. They don't know how to walk with a band of brothers. They don't know how to team with other people. They don't even know the basic skills of friendship. And so that's the kind of stuff we're trying to restore.
So if that is true for our generation, was that true for the last generation, the generation before that, and the generation before that? Is this just a common generational problem with manhood, or is this something new and different in our generation? And if so, then how did we get here?
There is something new and different, and that is that in previous generations, the culture of manhood, the bonding of men, the teaming of men together was forced on men almost automatically. Think about your ancestors, whatever your ethnicity is or family background, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, even 50 years ago, probably all lived in maybe a smaller town, tight family, large family. This was the norm. I come from a background where they lived in small southern villages, and some are Native American, so you had tribe. You had large families. You had brothers, you had uncles, you had grandfathers. Everybody was in the same home or the same compound or the same community, and they had to teach each other the lore of manhood, or the community wouldn't have survived. So if you're my son, I'm teaching you how to shoot. I'm teaching you how to woo a woman, as they used to say, and I'm teaching you how to discipline a son and all that kind of thing, because that's part of the survival of the community. Well, when you hit World War II, approximately, you hit the cultural upheavals that came afterwards, you hit the technological changes that we've had, the industrial changes that we've had. Now it's very possible for a man, first of all, to grow up in a home with no father. Second of all, to grow up in a home that's abstracted from the rest of his relatives, no grandfathers around, no uncles around, no cousins around. And it's very possible for him to grow up without any male models at all. Anybody who knows anything about manhood or fatherhood. More than half of men in America today are raised by women. So this is going to create a huge crisis. All of that to say, we have to be intentional about things that used to be automatic. We have to be intentional about going after building a band of brothers. Band of brothers was automatic years ago. Now you can walk alone in this world and never have a meaningful relationship with another man. In fact, the suicide rate in the Western world is skyrocketing for men. And it's skyrocketing largely when they do the psychological postmortem. They find out that it's loneliness that caused these men to kill themselves. In England, if you are 50 and older and you don't die of a heart attack, you've likely died of suicide. That's how prevalent suicide is.
Wow.
And the psychological postmortem is always about, I don't have any men who know me or care about me or connected to my life. So the short answer is, yes, something dramatic has changed. It's not just blaming a sexual revolution or blaming cultural revolution. It has to do with technology. It has to do with media. It has to do with everything. But the bottom line is, if we're going to survive, if we're going to be noble men, we have to be intentional about what used to be automatic. And that's the big message there.
Yes, and so I know the term Band of Brothers has come up quite a lot with my research on you, and even in the past, just with following your work. What is a Band of Brothers, and how would you suggest the average, 30 to 40-year-old guy, dad, husband with a lot of responsibility go about building that?
Yeah, it's a great question. A band of brothers, first of all, is a group of guys that you do life with, that you give them access to your life, you have access to their lives. Yeah, you have fun. Yeah, you smack talk. Yeah, you work out. Yeah, maybe you hike or you go on trips together, whatever. But the most important thing is that you have reached what I call a free fire zone. For those who've been in the military, they know the free fire zone has to do with a condition of how freely you can shoot on a battlefield. Well, in this context, it has to do with the fact that if you and I are in a band of brothers, I say to you, you can say to me anything that needs to be said to make me a better man. You can address anything. You hear a cell phone call where I'm tight with my wife, rude, angry with you can say, what's going on at home? I check out the back side of the waitress two or three times at the restaurant we're at. You go, hey, you got a babe at home. What's going on with you, man? What's up with that? I have not one glass of wine or two, but I have 6. You know what I'm saying? Or my language is dropping, or whatever it is. My house is falling apart. It's not a society in which we're critical of each other. It's a bunch of guys who are committed to helping each other become great men and having a lot of fun along the way. And that, again, that used to be almost automatic. You had a bunch of guys in the barracks, or you had a bunch of guys, and they might not have been devoted to noble purposes, but at least you had a bunch of guys around you. Now the average guy can't even name a best friend in our society. Surveys show the average guy cannot even name a best friend. So what you've got to begin to do is turn the relationships you have into something deeper. 3B them, as we sometimes humorously say, building your band of brothers, 3Bs. Start turning those relationships towards discussion of manhood, towards drawing men into what you need in your life. Let's say that I'm terrible at taking care of my money and keeping a checkbook, and a guy I'm hanging out with and working out with is really good at that. I say, look, I don't want to bug you, but could you help me in this area? And if I can help you in some other area, I will. You kind of have a covenant of help that goes on there a little bit, and that can deepen that, and maybe recommend a book, some book about manhood. And now the whole thing starts to turn towards discussions and challenging each other. And then one day you finally reach that free fire zone where you say, hey, challenge me where I need to be challenged. Let's do this thing together.
Yeah. So what you said about the band of brothers holds each other accountable, calls each other out on issues. I've had this discussion with a few of my friends in the last couple of years. I mean, it comes up actually often, the need for community. It's something I wanted to talk about maybe a little bit later on, more specifically. But I can think of a few of my friends that want that. They want to be called out.
Yeah.
They're not looking to they want to be challenged. And it seems to me like there's something in a man that actually wants that. If he's honest,
yes,
he wants that direct, honest feedback. So what is we have this need. It's not happening as much. Men seem to want this, but there's a barrier. I mean, it seems like.
Yeah.
Is that just a barrier in our own minds? What is that? What is that barrier?
It can be a number of things. It can be a cultural thing. In the South, I've had Southern guys go, well, I would never, hurt that man's feelings by addressing what needs to be. Or out in the West, we're supposed to be the Marlboro man, too individual to help each other. Up North, we're all supposed to be cold-hearted. There can be a lot of different things. But I find it comes down very quickly when somebody just gets transparent for a moment. I don't mean in the sense of, you're constantly talking about your weaknesses and boring everybody with your challenges. But I am talking about the fact that if I come to you and I say, look, I got a serious problem with my weight. You're obviously buff. You're obviously in good shape. Would you just show me how to work out better? And maybe we can build a deeper friendship at that level. And I'd appreciate it if you just, you take it to another level.
Yes.
You just take it beyond the sea. We're all awash in a sea of casual relationships.
Yes.
And so you've got to go ahead. I mean, I think most guys would be doing well to blow up their current circle of friends if they can't take it to the next level. I'm not really your friend if you can't say, my checkbook is falling apart. My marriage is falling apart. I don't know what to do with a teenage daughter. I'm 50 pounds overweight. I'm drinking too much. Whatever it is that if you can't say that and get me to help, I'm not a serious friend.
Yeah.
And you'd be better off finding somebody else than me.
Yeah. What would you say then, as it relates to manhood in this band of brothers, to a man or woman, because it could be either, that would say, well, that was great for 25 years ago, but this is 2019. That's not how we do things now. That sounds sexist, that you should have a band of your own gender or whatever. Yeah. I mean, what would you say to that?
Well, I think sexism and racism has to do with how we treat people in certain races and sexes. It doesn't have to do with how we get the coaching that we need to be good people. I live in D.C. most of my year, and I'm not being pejorative at all when I say my black friends call that Chocolate Town, and 90% of my friends there are blacks. And they're thrilled. I mean, it just so happens that in my band of brothers are a lot of blacks, but if my band of brothers was all white, my black friends would be going, well, great, Stephen's going to be a better friend for us. He's going to be a better guy for us. I don't care what color the people are who are chastising him about how many Oreos he eats or whatever,
Yep.
So I want you to be a great man. If all of your band of brothers is Chinese, or I mean, what difference does it make to me? When you show up in my world, you're a better man. You're a strong man. You're a noble man. You're physically fit. You're together. Your home is solid, and we can be good friends without me having to worry about who helped get you there. I don't know who your math teacher was in high school either, but he obviously taught you something. So my point is, I'm a little sarcastic about that kind of stuff because I think we let a little bit of trendiness creep in here. Do you really care what race my football coach is? I have a business mentor in D.C. She happens to be a black female. Does that matter to you? Suppose he was a male Chinese guy. You wouldn't care. So whatever gets me to the victory circle is what I care about.
Yes.
And I think I understand the charge that you're raising, but I think we're going to have to blow that stuff up because remember now, people not only are failing in life, but people are dying over these issues. Literally, people are killing themselves over this issue. So, given that I live in a very, very multi-ethnic world, and so I get real impatient with people being too choosy about these matters.
Yes, I totally agree, and that's really good insight. And don't you think also that it's some insight on the naysayer? Because what you said is, why would it matter who's helping us become a better person if we're becoming a better person? But the same naysayer that might say, well, that's sexist, might not actually want us to become a better person because that challenges them.
Right,
and
exactly.
So it's almost an insight into
every barrier, every excuse I can remove from anybody around me, I will. Well, I don't want to have a black doctor do surgery on me. Oh, really? Well, you're going to die of that disease, So that just what I do is I say, look, I'll get whatever help I can get from whoever I can get it from.
Yeah.
And if the best guys for me are Jewish or female or whatever, I mean, I'll just get the help that I need. You know.
Yep. Okay, so you have 4 maxims in the book. I want to go over them, and I want to ask questions about 2 of them. So maxim number 1 is manly men do manly things.
Yes.
Maxim number 2, manly men tend their fields.
Yes.
Maxim number 3 is manly men build manly men. And maxim number 4, manly men live to the glory of God.
Yes.
That's an interesting one that you would have in there. I want to come back to number 2. Manly men tend their fields. And this is similar to Jordan Peterson's rule number 6, I think it is, in his book 12 Rules for Life. Are you up on the Jordan Peterson stuff? I mean, he just seems to be all of the rage.
Yeah.
And I've seen a couple of his interviews, and finally I was like, well, there's enough people talking about this. I need to get the book. So I haven't even gotten to rule number 6 yet, but I've seen that it's a rule. So, and that is set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world.
Yeah.
What seems to me, that rule and your maxim, manly men tend their fields, could be saying somewhat the same things.
They're close. They're close.
So the question is, manly men tend their fields. Why is that maxim important? And is it naturally harder for men to tend their fields than it is women?
I don't think it's harder. I think that men have some weaknesses in them that can their makeup allows them to be distracted from that, and the messages of our culture of late distract them from that. I believe that I could have used other words. I could have used real estate terms. I could have said every man's meant to grow an estate and tend that estate. But I took the language from some ancient words. When even in the Bible, people may recall that Paul said, I'm not going to boast beyond the field assigned to me. Plato used the word, other people used the word. The idea is that I believe that for every stage of a man's life, there's a field assigned to him. It's the total body of responsibilities, obligations, and I would even say joys and duties that he's meant to have. So a 16-year-old's got half of a bedroom, and a job at Pizza Hut, and some textbooks and maybe a dating life and the obligation to be a good family member. That may be the total extent of his field. By the time you get to college, you've got more. By the time you're young married, you've got more. And it's not just the things you own. It's what are the priorities for your life. Like you might in this season of your life be devoting yourself to community service in a way you didn't a year ago. And in 3 years, you might be working on a doctorate, and you might pull back from all of the stuff that you've done in the community. I mean, that's just a small example. Mm-hmm. Your body may need more attention these 6 months than it will in a year. But ultimately, the field assigned to a man is everything he's responsible for. Mm-hmm. I mean, think for a moment about our image of the pitiful man that we despise. He's 100 pounds overweight, and he's sitting in a nasty sweatsuit and a Barco lounger, and his house is falling down around him. Nobody in that house is well tended. His wife is bitter. His kids are off slinking away to do stuff. They hate him. He's screaming for somebody to bring another beer and a sandwich before the second half, and he's not taking care of anything. That's our image of the pitiful man who's taking care of nothing and let everything in his life go to hell. And the opposite, of course, is a man who's tending his field, because I believe that one of the main functions of a man is to protect, hawk over, and to nurture everything to the fulfillment of its purpose within the field assigned to him. So that means his kids, that means his wife, that means his homes, that means his money, that means the other people who are connected to him in that way, and of course that also means taking care of himself and having a band of brothers and getting some time. I think most guys don't rest enough, believe it or not. I think most guys don't play enough. I mean, so that's in there too. But that field assigned to you is very, very important, and most we're obviously dealing with huge devastation in our society because of a failure to tend fields. But I think most men don't even think about that way in terms of manhood.
Yes, totally agree. You have a quote in the book from Theodore Roosevelt, who's my namesake, so I always love quotes from him. But he says, big jobs usually go to the men who prove their ability to outgrow small ones.
Yes.
Such a great quote.
Well, and that's how we increase, don't we? I mean, I increase in a job in my life as I tend the field I currently have, and then I'm given more. Either I earn more if I'm self-employed, my company gets bigger, I get more, whatever, bigger platform, however you want to measure it. If I'm working for Ford, I move up within Ford. Why? Because I've done a good job with the field I had. My kids increase and prosper and go off and do great things. Why? Because I tended my field. My wife is shiny and happy because I tended my field. I could go on and on and on. So a man, it's important that we look at men and urge men to look at themselves in terms of how they're tending their field.
Yes.
And by the way, I don't assume that I have a 3D view on myself, so that's why I need a band of brothers.
Yep.
They notice things I don't notice. In fact, my band of brothers will call me on the road. I travel a lot, and they know it. They'll call me on the road and ask me how the eating is going, and and I don't have any special problems there. And how you doing with the women? I don't have any special problems there, but they're not stupid.
Yep.
They don't. When a man travels and he's away from home, he's a little bit more vulnerable. So they ask. I say, ask me anything. I don't get offended. Ask me if I've never had cocaine in my life. Ask me if I'm taking white powder up my nose. Whatever you want to ask me, I don't care. And so what they're doing is they're making sure that I'm tending my field. Did you get a workout yesterday? Great, proud of you. That kind of thing.
Yes.
So that's what we're talking about. And I think if men will think about their lives that way rather than just a list of masculine duties, I think they'll be happier.
And so do you think that maybe at one point we were doing this, manly men tending their fields, maybe culturally speaking, sort of born out of the American dream, so to speak, which could eventually appear shallow to some, and there may be sort of a fallout. And so I wonder if we're sort of in that fallout now. Like, it seems to me like it's less cool or common, or just like there is sort of a backlash on the idea that tend what you have, grow, more responsibility, become more successful even. And yet, it's not an American dream thing. It's actually a biblical principle. It's a wisdom principle.
There's no question.
We are called to take responsibility with what we have. And so maybe the difference there can come back to motive. Are you trying to tend your field so you can be, rich and powerful and abusive? Not that those three even go together, but why are you trying to tend? Why are you tend your field to take responsibility?
Well, what happens with manhood in our generation is they want the success that comes from tending your field, but they don't want to actually tend their field.
Yes.
This is one of the big tensions between baby boomers and millennials. Baby boomers look at millennials and go, "Well, man, you can be as successful as you want to be, but you'll have to put in the 50 years I did to get there.
Yes.
You'll have to gain the skills. You'll have to learn the things I learned." I think that what's going on now. We're dealing with a cultural backlash, against the idea of responsibility, but we're also seeing the devastations of responsibility. A father not at a home is a failure to tend a field. A son unfathered, a failure to tend a field. A community left to fall apart, a failure to tend a field. Part of my obligations to the community I live in, et cetera. So I think that this is a really seminal idea, and I think it changes the understanding of manhood.
Yes.
I battle. I really try to get people who speak to men not just to do two things, not to guilt men all the time, and don't touch this, don't do that, don't be bad, and then also not to make them feel like they've got a list of manly dues when they go home. list of duties. It's not that way. When I tell a man, you've got a field, and your obligation under God is to grow that field and cause it to fulfill its destiny and make sure everything within it flourishes, I see men light up. They get excited about that because men are doers.
Yes.
But if I go home and I say, feel differently about stuff,
Yes.
the guy's got to sit in the shower or the toilet or in the office and go, okay, how do I do emotions management to make this
Right.
happen?
Yep.
And that'll happen. I think the feelings will change, but it's the duties that guys love
Yes.
when it comes to having a vision like that. We don't
Yes.
give men enough of a vision for noble manhood.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's in the book Every Good Endeavor by Tim Keller and Catherine Alsdorf, and they make a point in there that the church often says to the carpenter, do a good job, come to church, and don't drink too much beer.
Right.
When what the church should be telling to that carpenter is build really great tables.
Right.
So I totally agree that that you can strip away the power of man by focusing on the wrong things.
Yes.
So I want to get to maxim number 3. Manly men build manly men. And there's a quote in your book, and it says, a woman simply is, but a man must become.
Yeah.
And it has to do with manly men build manly men. And when I read that when I read that quote, a woman simply is, but a man must become, I just stopped.
Yeah.
Like that was one that I had to really stop and chew on.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually really accurate.
It is.
So how do we go about turning males into men now? How do we build?
That quote is by Camille Paglia, who's one of my favorite secular commentators on culture. And she is making the point that women become women largely through the biological changes in their bodies. I mean, women suddenly want to have children. Why? Because they get to a certain point. I mean, for the most part, I'm speaking in generalities now. Or they grow breast, or their bodies change. They stop being tomboys, and now they become prom queens. I mean, it's a shift. It happens. But masculinity in a male has to be called out, and it's done by other males. And that's the thing we've got to realize. A man doesn't naturally and biologically just go on to become a man. I mean, I realize he grows hair and he gets bigger in certain places, and he has more muscles and what have you, deeper voice. But that doesn't make him a man. That doesn't automatically turn him towards what manhood is or what noble manhood is. It's got to be called out. It's got to be pointed out. It's got to be coached out. It's got to be taught. It's got to be modeled. That's why we need a community of men. I mean, the reality is that men need noble masculine bonding of the kind I'm talking about, really more than women need female bonding to become women.
Interesting.
See what I mean? I mean, women bond easily. I mean, my wife can build a best friend in the line at Kroger before she gets home, whereas I've got to be a little bit more intentional about my friendships.
Yeah.
Like I say, I travel a lot. I do a lot of things. I could have a world of casual relationships and have no one who really knows my life. So all that to say that she's making a very, very important point, and that is that as much as, given what I do, I believe obviously in books, I believe in conferences, I believe in television, I believe in videos, I do it all. What I know is ultimately what calls masculinity out of you and me are other men who are watching our life, who know what masculinity is, and who can draw it out, coach it, challenge it, woo it out, so to speak, train us in it. That's how it's going to happen.
Yeah. You talk in the book about the value of just doing physical things as a man, and when we think about our body being attached to our mind, I mean, we are a whole person. So do you think that is another thing that we've become less good at? Men are meant to be active and physical, and now we're in a world where just naturally you're going to be less active and physical unless you are deliberate about it. I
think that's absolutely a great insight that you've had. They do studies where they put little girls in a room with a whole bunch of toys, and the scientists are watching them through windows. Little girls inevitably put the chairs, if they can manipulate the whole room, they turn chairs facing each other and look each other right in the face. And finally, one little girl says, "I like your hair." And they become best friends, and they go skipping off to have fun for the rest of the day. The little boys inevitably, after kind of circling for a while, will move the chairs side by side, shoulder to shoulder, and look out at the world, look out at the toys and what's going on. And finally, one will propose something to do. Inevitably. Hey, and so it's like, hey, I bet we can set that door on fire. Hey, I bet I can race you to that tree. Hey, I bet I can beat you at, whatever. And they propose something, and they do it. And that's how men bond. You know how it is. You've worked on a work crew or remodeled a house for a widow of the church or whatever kind of thing you've been involved in. Men size each other up in motion. It's while we're working. It's while we're moving around. The guy who's sitting there drinking water all the time and talking all the time and never lifts a hammer, we know who he is. We got his number, right?
Yep.
But the guy who quietly goes about his work but still tells a funny story once in a while and is pleasant to be around, we got his number too. We know who he is.
Yes.
So men are doers. Men are doers. In fact, I know a pastor who even teaches his...
Let me turn this off. Sorry about that.
That's all right. I know a pastor who even teaches his guys to pray, Lord, what do you want me to do today? Because men relate so much to doing, even in prayer. So, yeah, I think it's a very, very vital concept.
Fascinating. I want to ask you about masculinity in the church, because it strikes me, and I have not really read this or I've not seen studies on this, but it strikes me as a lot of common evangelical Christianity, we could even say, tends to be more feminine.
Yes.
And then there are pockets of churches or select churches that maybe just by happenstance that church is not feminine, it's either more balanced or it's just masculine. Nothing against the women, obviously they're welcome there, but there is a masculine order to things. What is your assessment of that?
Yeah, I think there is a tendency towards the feminine in churches. I think it's easily fixed. It's done a number of ways. First of all, the pastor's got to be a manly figure and be happy to bring his manhood, so to speak, on stage and bring it before the church. Hey, we're all going hunting. Hey, I enjoyed hanging with the guys. Hey, I'm a male, so I don't think the way you women do. And just have it right out there for everybody to see. The other thing is that the men's ministry in a church cannot be some little add-on, some little thing superglued on the side of the church. It's got to be led from the stage. It's got to be central to what's going on. Time and again, they'll ask me to come speak at a large church somewhere, or the men's ministry. And the men's ministry is something that meets on Saturday morning. The pastor's never darkened the door. It's got a tiny, it might be hundreds, but if the church is 10,000, I'm not happy with 200 men gathering on a I'm morning. I want 5,000 men gathering on on a Saturday morning.
Yes.
To hear me speak. So I'm concerned about that. I think also, there's a whole issue of the actual culture of the church. What kind of songs are we singing? I have a friend who jokes that, when we tell guys to, we'll lead guys in masculinity and teach them and train them at a conference or a seminar, and then when we worship, it's like we're singing songs, I kiss him with the kisses of my mouth or something like that, rather than where are the war songs? Where's Braveheart worship? That kind of thing. I'm not saying it's all about testosterone and war, but I am saying that you got to give men something to hook into.
Yes.
And then of course, men are doers. Don't just make them, don't call church just what you do sitting there for an hour on Sunday morning.
Yes.
Get them busy, get them doing things, get them changing stuff, get them on missions trips, get them changing neighborhoods, get them coaching each other, turn them on each other with principles and with guides and with books. And I'll tell you what, it can just change. The guy I've seen do it best is a guy who pastors a church just outside of Fort Bragg. And I'll tell you what, he really has something special. But one of the things he said was, I want to build a church that really impacts men, because men in turn will make a better world for women. So he knew the stat that 80% of all church jobs were held by women. So he reversed it, and he hired men instead of women, and that sounds bigoted, but he's grown such a big church now. He's got more women by far on staff than he ever would have had before, and all the women are thrilled, of course, given how solidly, wonderfully masculine the church is.
So, and to that point, don't you also think that, yes, men's ministries and all that, but men crave authenticity, whether they really know it or not.
Yes.
And if the pastor doesn't truly believe in what he's saying, we're going to spot that either consciously or subconsciously.
Exactly.
We want no part of that.
Right.
But if the pastor really believes in what he's saying, there's a gravitas there that men will latch onto, and then that can sort of spread throughout the church.
The bottom line is that most men are bored in church and they don't respect their pastors. So if you got serious men leading churches who lead as men, if they're authentic, walking in authentic manhood, and they challenge other men to do the same, I think you'll see men rally. Men want to be involved. Men want to believe in God. They want to fulfill their purpose as men. They want to do good in the world. They just need somebody to point the direction and make it possible.